Well, this is Ronnie Trost coming to you with another auto repair upgrade video using 4K. So I don't know if YouTube's going to show it in 4K, but it's being recorded in 4K. So we're going to do the computerized fuel injected carburetor install for my 305 engine with a higher capacity cam, which I don't know the numbers on the specification. Somebody else bought it, but it's got more higher lobes on it than a regular cam, stock cam. And next I'll show you the components I ordered, and then we'll get started. Okay, this is two different components that are ordered separately, basically, because one is the fuel system, the other is the carburetor injection system. So this is the newest model. I waited a little bit to get it, but it's the fuel command center. And this is the main unit of the fuel injected carburetor. So the only thing I can recommend is try to keep everything in one spot, because of my last install. If you lose a component, it really just messes your world up. So you got all these little things that start coming out of the package. You got so much stuff, you know, it just goes on and on. So try to make a special place in your house that you can lock the door so nobody can mess with your stuff. Came with some high capacity pressure hose, whole bunch of fittings. Got little things in boxes and instructions, quick start guide. There's the instructions. I would recommend reading all the way through. It's not that difficult, but make sure you're not using the wrong diagram for your car, you know, and all things like that. All right, let's go outside. So the challenge is we're going to remove this. It's all going to be computerized. And we're going to need to hook something up to the tack spot. We're going to need something hooked to the cooling sensor. Then the fuel pump. I actually have two fuel pumps. There's a mechanical one down there, which feeds an electric one, just because the electric one will send the fuel quicker to the carburetor rather than waiting for it to pump. I guess I'm going to put the fuel center in this empty spot right here, because the other side is for the battery. So the only problem I have is that these exhausts may leak, which causes a problem. So I'm going to have to really concentrate before I get too far into it and how to solve that problem, because these headers I ordered put pressure on themselves and leave a little gap right here. And I'm going to try to figure out a way to tighten those up or seal them up. So then, before I installed the headers, I bought new headers, because you have to install, the first thing that you have to do, let's go under here, is install an oxygen sensor. And so got my neighbor down the street who's an experienced welder to weld in to the oxygen sensor. So I ordered this part before I ordered the kit, because you're talking about like $1,500, but this part is like $18. So you can order this to get all of this done first. I like this better than they got some clamps, but then it just seems unprofessional to me to use the clamps. So had this welded in, and you basically just drill a hole. We had to find the right size drill bit. Just got a new drill bit from Home Depot, the right size, so that it's really sharp. It's hard to cut through this unless you have a new drill bit that's nice and sharp, and then it cut through it real nice. A hole just a little bit bigger than this, and then you weld this, and then it's going to look a little rusty, kind of discolored. So then I sprayed it with some Rust-Oleum silver colored paint so that it wouldn't start rusting, because it's bare metal now that you burned off the chrome. And all of this has been redone so it's not leaking. Okay, it's all new headers. Just got to make sure it's not leaking somewhere, because it'll throw off your oxygen sensor. And as you read in the manual, that leaking and throwing off your oxygen sensor is big problems for the computer. So it's something you really need to address. Can't have just like holes here and like rusted holes here and then put a new one in. So I went ahead and just bought new headers. It's just they didn't fit, so there's a little pressure in different, like right here there's a little pressure, and that pressure is causing it to leak near the engine block. So, you know, if I do it again, my recommendation is like specifically order headers for your car to make sure that they fit correctly, instead of just stock headers. If you do just get stock headers, like, make sure they fit. So like what happened was I just assumed they would fit, and then I had this oxygen sensor welded in, and then now you find out it doesn't fit right. It's just touching some piece of metal, putting pressure on it. And now I don't want to replace them because I'll have to start the process all over again. So, alright, so before I install the new carburetor, I do some understanding and some prep work. This is the temperature sensor that has to be screwed into the intake manifold. If it doesn't fit, this is an adapter. Use some Teflon tape according to the directions. Theoretically, one of those two should fit. And the matching wire is this blue one. So when it's hooked up, that's going to bolt onto there. Then we have 4 jets. One is a return, so it's marked return. I don't know if you can see that. So we don't, with a command center, we don't need a return. With a high pressure inline, you need a return going all the way back to the fuel tank, which we don't want to do. So we're going to unscrew the return. And screw in the plug. Okay. So then you have one inlet. These could also be inlets, but you just pick out which inlet you want and you move it over, and then you can put the plug where you don't want the inlet to be. So like, it just makes it easier if you have metal lines, not to bend them too much, if you can just switch the plugs around. So you got one inlet, plug, plug, and plug, because I have a fuel command center. And also, this is the distributor advance vacuum, the little one on the top, right there. I don't know if you can see that. And then this one is the brake booster. This one is PVC, but I don't really have PVC, so that's going to stay closed. So I'm just mentally prepping. And then we're going to go through the wiring diagrams. Having done that, so I'll get back with you. Simone was wearing her most beautiful dress. Okay, our next step was to find a spot for the thermos sensor to go. So this one is already going to a gauge. There's this one right next to it. So I unscrewed that. Somewhere on the intake manifold it said, okay. And then we see that this doesn't match. Okay, but this matches the adapter. So we're going to put some Teflon tape on there and screw that in with a socket. The other thing is that these bolts that hold the carburetor down were rusty. So while I'm doing that, I'm soaking them in some uric acid to get rid of the rust. Don't want to leave it in there too long because sometimes it'll actually dissolve the metal. So as soon as they're fairly clean, I'm gonna take them back out and rinse them with water. You can get the muriatic acid at a swimming pool place, but just be warned, it'll burn your skin and the fumes will knock you out. So make sure you're outside, and you can use latex gloves, and don't spill any. It ain't gonna kill you, it'll just hurt. It'll burn you a little bit. So these look pretty clean. I'm gonna take them out, rinse them off. Maybe even hit them with the wire brush. Whoa, got some fumes on that. So let's go ahead and just get some water on there. Stop the erosion process. And I'll just leave that in this plastic tub in case I want to use a little bit more on some rusty parts. And that's it for now. Get back with you. Okay, so this is the new Command Center 2. And after talking with the Vitech customer service, that you have to have a return line to the gas tank for this unit. The old one, no, but then the old unit has inferior mechanisms compared to the new one. So you get the new one and then you got to put a return line. Now the Camaro, this is 1980, had a canister. So if you have a canister, you basically have a return line, but you may have to look for it a little bit. So there's this like thing that looks like a return line right here. It dead ends to nothing and goes back along with the gas line. So you might think that that's a return line, but actually when I followed it back, it just goes halfway down the car and stops and doesn't go anywhere. So that's not going to work. Then I traced it, and there's a return line over here next to the brake, which doesn't make much sense to me, like how they ran a rubber tube somewhere, unless, now that I think of it, this was probably the spot for the canister, carbon canister, which I have now converted to the battery because it's a more solid, it was a more solid platform. So I guess I reversed the battery, and now what used to be the canister is now the fuel cell. I mean the command center. So this is where I found the return line. I have to make sure that it's not being plugged by some type of apparatus, that it just, so I'm going to run some compressed air in here and see if I can hear it bubbling in the gas tank. If that's true, then we're good to go. If it's not bubbling and there's a blockage, then I'm going to have to unblock the blockage somehow. So I'm going to go down here and show you how I determined all that, in case you're wondering. When we take a look at the gas tank. Okay, this is important stuff, so you don't like blow yourself up with the gas tank being under pressure or whatever. Who knows what can happen if you don't follow the directions. I don't even know where I was at before. Okay, so we come over here. Okay, we see that there's two lines coming out of the gas tank. 1, 2. Okay, one on top of the other. When we follow those lines, weirdly enough, they split right there. And so one goes that way and one goes that way. This is the one that goes to the fuel pump, which means this is the one that goes to the carbon canister. So we follow that all along the bottom of the car to make sure that it doesn't have a break, and it's a continuous line, which means that I'm going to run a rubber line from here over to the fuel command center. And then, weirdly enough, so someone who was not me has already blocked off there's 3 lines coming out of the mechanical fuel pump, and someone already has the return line for the mechanical fuel pump blocked off, which is right here. And they put that in there. It might even have been me, now that I think about it. I see my little tool in there, but I don't know if I was the original one to block it off. So then what I'm going to have to do is tee this I don't have to because you can buy another fuel pump, but I don't want to get under there and change it, because I'm going to tee this also into the return line to the command center. Then I'll have return line for that, hooked to the return line for this, going over next to the brake, the return line for what used to be the canister. So the only other thing about that I have to do, like I told you, I also added an electric fuel pump just to keep, helps it start a little faster. But the only other thing now is you need to have a vented gas tank. And like the more I study on Google, it's like there's not enough information. So what I'm going to have to do is, apparently, I got to get my key, but apparently you can drill a hole and then that's the vent. So I may do a little more research, or I may just drill the hole and forget about it. Haven't decided yet. I'm looking up vented gas caps and I'm not seeing what I want to see, but I may just buy a vented gas cap. And I already have the new cleaned up bolts in place waiting to go. And that's it for this one. So I'm at the stage now where we have to solder ends on the wires. So if you don't have this stuff, go get you some flux and a little paintbrush for the flux. I like to use this real thin solder, melts easier. This is also another thin solder. The thick stuff, like, it doesn't want to melt. Now if you're an electrician, you're probably laughing because I am not an electrician, but hopefully I can just do enough to get it so that it's a good solid connection. It doesn't have to be pretty for me. So what I was doing, like one soldering gun doesn't melt it enough, so I'm using two, like one on each side to melt the solder. Two old soldering guns, the yellow one and the black one. This is a cool little thing that you can clip things on and use the magnifying glass. Get from Harbor Freight, pretty cheap. And go through your instructions and make sure you put your rubber grommets on first. Like here, you're going to have these little rubber caps. Make sure you put them on the wire first and before you do your soldering. Oh, and I crimped it also right there. Crimped it with the rubber on the wire, and then it holds the wire steady, and then this holds the connection. This holds the wire steady. Crimp that with some pliers, and then this solder spot holds the wire steady, and now this is going to go on the battery. And so you got different things, they're all marked here. That one needs to go to a key, that one goes to the tack, and on, etc. And it's just something needs to be done. And so you might have to go buy different size clips. And this one here fits on the tack spot. So I'm going to solder that one next. Okay, so the return line to the gas tank, I went out and bought the hose. 6 feet of fuel line, 3/8 inch. When you put the air compressor in there, it doesn't actually bubble in the gas tank. You can hear air going through it. So what I did was I took this tube here, I held it up one end to my ear and one where the gas cap, take the gas cap off the filler tube, and had the compressed air going through here by holding the handle with some electrical tape wrapped around it so it would stay on, and taped the end of it here, and then I went back there and I could hear the air. Now when it bubbles, that's the one that the fuel comes out of, is at the bottom. So if you want to back flush your fuel line, you can hear it bubbling. But somebody said they don't recommend that because it can tear off the little screen net on the bottom. So you only do that if you absolutely have to, which I've done once, and then just do it a little bit. The other thing, so my bolts that I de-rusted, because I'm in Florida, they immediately rust again if you don't put the Rust-Oleum primer on there. I kind of knew it was going to happen, but I wanted to see it happen again in real life, so it's back rusty again. And air, moist humidity can come in through the bottom. So I took one of them up to Harbor Freight, and I just solved the problem by getting stainless steel, new stainless steel bolts for $5. Anytime you can replace this rusty crap with stainless steel, chrome, like even my chrome rusts down here in Florida, it's hot and humid all the time. Then I ran into another problem, and that is that in the instructions they call this a lock hose, or lock tubing, but it doesn't tell you how to make it work. So I was putting WD-40 on the end and pushing it on there, and maybe even grease, but I could never push it all the way on there. So I put all these clamps on there, which I thought that was how you did it, because they don't tell you that how to do it. And after I did all of this work with all of these clamps and fittings, you see there's more up here on the filter. I kind of had a sense that I needed to heat up the end. So I went to YouTube and look up the lock hose fittings, which is spelled L-O-C, and found out you have to heat them up with a heat gun, the end of them, which I had a heat gun in the right there in the closet, but the instructions didn't tell me how to do it. So you don't even need these. If you heat them on, push them all the way on there, heat them up a little, it's supposed to seal it automatically, but they didn't tell you that in the instructions. So that's one of the things I don't like about these companies. They don't send somebody out to do it for real and say what the problems they ran into. They should hire me, I guess, to do all the upgrades, because unless you've never worked with this tubing before, you don't know what it's for, what it does. They could have at least put a little pamphlet, a little piece of paper in the instructions saying this is how you work these end fittings. So now I have to go back and redo all of this, and I scratched it up with vice grips trying to get it on there. Pushed it on there as hard as I could. Still doesn't go all the way on there because you got to heat them up. And then I didn't need to buy all of these. You know, that was $7 worth of clamps. Don't even need the clamps. And they're everywhere. Here's one, here's two, here's one, here's one, here's one. Hit it some more. So that's where I'm at right now. And I'm going to get to work redoing all of these ends. It's going to take me a whole day to redo what I already did so that it'll be correct. Okay, so I just want to go over a couple things. The overflow for the mechanical fuel pump, I then routed into, you have to go buy brass fittings. I mean, you can use plastic, but I wouldn't do it because it could break at any time. But I use these fuel injection clamps because they're stronger than the regular clamps. So I had to shop around to find the barb fitting, but these are two different sizes. So the barb fitting for this one is smaller, then screws onto the coupler to the barb fitting for the bigger one, joining these together into another brass T. So like one I got from Discount Auto Parts, one I got from Harbor Freight. This one I had connector, but you can buy it at Harbor Freight. Then this T, AutoZone don't carry much stuff anymore. I'm getting kind of frustrated with them, but the T I got at Discount Auto Parts. The brass barbed ends on each end, the three of them. Okay, so put some Teflon tape, screwed in the pressure. Found a little yellow cap for this. I don't know why they didn't supply one, but I got my negative ground hooked up over here to a spot I cleaned off with muriatic acid and a wire brush to make sure it's touching metal. It's got like 3 fuel filters, one going into the electric fuel pump, one going from the electric fuel pump to the command center, because they want this to be filtered, this to be filtered. Then there's another filter here that they supplied for the throttle body. And so the matching the wires up, the orange one you're not supposed to hook up until after you pump some gas into the command center, so that's not hooked up yet, but it's ready to go. It has the end soldered on it, ready to go. I spliced into this for the distributor as being the white wire, which says key, because when you turn the key on, the distributor turns on. So there's like a big twisty going around 1, 2, 3, 4 wires, and then tape to keep it from corroding. Got the blue wire up in there for the tack. Okay, and so I still got to plug everything back into the throttle body. Throttle body I bolted down. Okay, still got to hook up the accelerator pedal right there. Got my transmission hookup that I was dealing with earlier. I don't know why this keeps falling out, but anyway. So now I'm going to hook up all the wires. I'm also going to time it. So I'm going to have to get get the timing light down in there and look for idling at about 16 before top dead center. I'm going to do that. I got my wire hooked up, goes to the battery. Cleaned that off with muriatic acid before I installed it. So this is, I think, for this wire goes to the starter. This is for the main power to the car. So I'm still gonna plug some stuff up, but that's where I'm at right now. Still gonna hook up this part here. Needs to hook up still, so I can screw that on and turn it. It's not really the way it should be. I'll work on that in a few minutes. And that's it for now. We'll try to get you in on the starting, see what happens. Okay, now I'm going to show some new additions before I start the engine. The brake vacuum line is hooked up with a clamp in the right spot. This side is the vacuum, the other side is PVC, which I'm not going to use. This is the vacuum, this is the PVC. Then on top of that, right here, may even have to move that clamp a little, is the vacuum advance for the distributor. But I don't want to hook that up yet until you time it. You're supposed to time it with that plugged up in the vacuum advance open. Then I did some work with these wires. I bundled them up. And so this is just like off the top of my head, I'm just thinking, what can I wrap all this with? And I just thought of a rubber glove and I cut it up. I still want to cover up this ends. I don't want too much of this factory very thin wiring to show. I also took some washing machine hoses and I cut the ends off to cover the red one that goes to the battery. I found a plastic one here in the shop that does the tack and the power, and covered that one up. Over here there's a thin orange one that powers. This is a ground, this is just an old lamp. They didn't really give you ground wire, so it's just like an old electrical outlet. So I'm not worried about covering that up because I can always replace that. The orange one is right here, and so again, the washing machine hose to cover it, going back to the rubber glove covering. So you can see all the new wires. I mean, they have their own covering on a little bit, so I'm not going to worry about that. But all the new flimsy wiring is covered. So that should be okay. Again, you don't hook this up, the positive, until you pump it full of fuel, so you don't burn it up, according to the instructions. And so my vacuum advance is waiting to be installed after I time it, which is this hose right here. I'll just cut it and put it on right there once I time it. And it's almost ready to start. So I'm gonna put it on the tripod and let you watch me try to start it. but I'm pretty sure everything is the way I want it for now. Again, I'm not like thinking of everything. You may want to do a whole different thing right here with a box, plastic box or something like that. And that's it. Alright, I'm getting ready to fire it up for the first time. So what I'm looking for is to fill up the command center. And I have a glass fuel filter. So when this is full and stays full, that means the command center is filled up. I'm not trying to start it, I'm just trying to fill up the command center. Give my starter a little rest. So I bought this gas cap from AutoZone. It's the Duralast, whatever, you can see that. About 15 bucks. It's supposed to have pressure release for vacuum and pressure. So if the pressure builds up in the tank too much, it releases it. If it causes too much of a vacuum, it releases it. So hopefully this is good enough for the job. Next, I'm going to hook up the computer and get ready to try to start it again. Alright, we're ready to go to the initial startup screen. And it says choose number 4, go to EFI initial startup, engine setup. Saying it's not hooked up to the command center, so we'll work offline. So cylinders 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Engine. Can't do these one at a time, I'm sure. I guess so, I don't know. Put the 305 in there. One, two on the cam. Rev limit RPM. I don't know, put 5,000 I guess. Oh shoot, could have just pressed that button. That should say 800. Five, 800. Okay, I'm going by this chart they sent me. So looks like, well, we could put 6,000. For that. all that matches. So I saved that information. Get back to cranking, a little bit of cranking. I'm going to have to go back and see, how do I know the command center is full of fuel. Okay, I cranked it about 4 or 5 good times. The book says you only need to do it twice, so I'm assuming my command center has gas in it. Hopefully. My mechanical fuel pump is working right. So now I'm going to hook the wire up. The orange power wire to it. Getting a little stuck from the solder. That's okay. We got it. So, drop it. Pull it out. Solder was getting in the way, but I got the thread started now. So, should be able to crank this on there. Good and snug. Yep. Cover it up with the rubber covering. That. Hopefully that'll keep the moisture out, but not in Florida, I bet you. Not in Florida. Doesn't keep the moisture out in Florida. Okay, so now let's turn our thing back on. What's the ECU? ECU, no response. I don't know what ECU no response means. Gonna have to look that up. Okay, looks like I got everything set up the way it's supposed to be. The no ECU response was because the key wasn't on. After you set up your thing, you can send it to the ECU. If the key is on, right now the key's off. Okay. But I'm gonna work offline. Now you can save your calculated data or load calculated data. So I already have one saved. I don't want to overwrite it. So I'm going to load backup number 1. Load it. And then all my numbers come back up. Okay. So the ECU already has the data in it. So we're going to try to, this is the initial startup. So you're watching the initial startup. Well, the private twice. It's raining, by the way. Shoot some gas in the prime. Prime it again. Prime it one more time. Let's see what happens. Got an exhaust leak, which I'll have to work on, but it seems to be running. we're too far advanced. Advancing is this way. Well, I can't find my timing mark, so I'm going to have to get a little white out and mark the spot better so I can see it. So we'll take a pause. Okay, so even though this was a brand new hot rod, high performance harmonic balancer, Florida beats it up with the rust like everything else. Good thing about Florida is we don't have safety inspections and emissions inspections, so you can just pretty much run whatever you want. But then the curse of that is you've got rust. No matter what you do, there's rust. So I want to put a mark on the edge. You see these numbers, but the only one I really need is the 0. And the timing plate covers up most of it. The only thing you can see is the edge. So right, let me get the light. I can't even see. You can see better with the camera than I can. Okay. So we see here we got the 0 right there. But we're only going to be able to see the edge of it. So this little spot here is the 0. So we want to make sure that that is, sorry about the camera work here, but so we're dipping a little paintbrush here into the white paint. Hopefully we got some. And you can almost see this part here too. So we're going to mark that all area there to be 0. Like that. You can even do the whole line if you want. You can't really see it. But just in case, it makes you feel better. You can do this whole line right there. Now, that may not even be the right side. There may be one on the other side. So, what I'm going to do in that case is I'm going to I'm going to turn it. Oh my God. All right. Find the right socket. I don't know if that's the right one. Okay. So we got the right socket and an extension. So we can turn it. I don't know if you can see that. Oh God, just stop that thing. Alright, I'm back to the timing procedure. I went under there, put a white spot on my 0 mark. Smell a little gas, but I don't see nothing leaking. So let's start it up again. Let's see if we can time it better. Well, I found a big gas leak, so I got to stop on my overflow pipe over here. So I'll get back with you. The white dot that I painted. It's right at the top. It's a little bit more advanced than I'd like. So I'm gonna retard it. I'm gonna retard it just a little bit. That much. You want it about 12 degrees, but you can look that up on the internet if you like. That's pretty much where I want it. Maybe just a tad less. 12 degrees BTC. And that's where I want it. So well, obviously it needs a little work. I like to get that idle down somehow. I don't know what they did to that idle, but anyway, it's running. So we got a little tune-up stuff left to do. Okay, so I did some work today. The wiring for the new alternator had to be soldered and then put some shrink wrap on top of it. I had to look up the diagrams. There's a brown wire and a red wire that went to the old alternator, and this new one are all white, and so you have to kind of look up on the diagram. The brown wire goes to the gauges, which has to hook to one of these wires. Two wires aren't being used, and the big wire has to go to the battery, which you can hook directly to here, but it also has another hookup where the old alternator went to, which is what I hooked it up to. I put some Rust-Oleum primer on some of these things that are starting to rust real fast. The water pump was rusting fast in this Florida humidity, so I put some primer on it, just to, on top at least, just so I don't see the rust as much. If it's on the bottom, oh well, one day I'll change the water pump out. But I wish I would have painted it before I put it on there. Rust-Oleum primer and then maybe a coat of orange on top. Your other stuff here is aluminum. It creates its own barrier once it gets a little corroded. Then it stops corroding. So there's no reason to really mess with that. It doesn't look as beautiful as a chrome job, but chrome rust too. So, you know, I got rust spots on my chrome valve covers. So just because it's chrome doesn't mean it's rust proof in Florida. And I made, so this is some of the shrink wrap here. And soldering guns. And then the computer. Now what they don't tell you is that this has its own idle screw. So you can set a minimum. Didn't tell you that in the instruction. So it was already too high and I couldn't figure out why. And then I'm like, well, maybe it has an idle adjustment screw. So once I backed it out a turn and a half, the idle went down, and then I could play with it, set it on the computer to whatever I want, 400, 500, 600. But I'll have to get it out on the road and see what I like it to be at when I'm sitting at the red light. And then I could just control it with the computer, what the idle is. Set my timing. So that's good. Still got an exhaust leak, which I got to fix. But anyway, the project's almost completed. That sound is the flex plate touching the starter gear. It's nothing important I can't fix, but it's okay, so I'm not even really going to fix it. Makes a little noise, but this is just a test of the new fuel injected carburetor, computerized, has perfect idle mixture. It'll idle if I want to get out of the car perfectly. It'll sit at the red light perfectly. It'll take off perfectly. Everything. There's a little hesitation there, but the computer will learn from itself and make all its corrections. The more I drive it, the smarter it gets. Or I could raise up the RPMs a little bit with the computer. And that's the way we roll down here in Florida. Just like that. Just want to give you an inside view of the command center taken apart, because I had to take it apart. Reason being, I had to get a new pump. This object here, still have to take it apart a little bit more. 2 days after I started driving with the new system, it broke down, it failed, catastrophic failure, because this pump started shorting out which was then blowing the fuse for the pump, the orange wire. Diagnosing with the electrometer. I called Tech. They gave me permission to take it apart without voiding the warranty. So they sent me a new pump, which normally costs about $110. So the car won't run if that ever happens to you, which is why I'm going to carry around my old Edelbrock carburetor in the trunk in case I need, if I'm stuck on the highway and I went out of town, because it took almost over a week for them to send a new pump under warranty. So if you're out of town on the highway and you have catastrophic failure, you may need to just, fastest thing would be to unbolt this and run your electric pump straight into the Edelbrock carburetor again, so you can get home without tow trucks or rental cars and all kinds of things like that, especially if you're out of state. But according to Tech, supposedly this is what happened. I run a mechanical fuel pump into an electric fuel pump, then the electric fuel pump into the Tech command center. Reason being, electric fuel pumps like to push, not pull the fuel. And if you have it up here on the engine, it's trying to pull it from the gas tank, which I didn't want to do. So I kept the mechanical fuel pump to pull it from the tank and to push it to the electric fuel pump. I don't want the electric fuel pump positioned back either inside the fuel tank or under the fuel tank, because it's just, you got to lay down and get dirty to work on it. I want it up here so I can see, I can feel if it's vibrating, working, if it's the wire's loose. It's all right here standing up. But apparently, according to Tech, I increased the pressure too much, and it's only allowed to have between 4 and 6 pounds of pressure. And I probably got it up to 7, 8, or 9 by adding the fuel pumps. So he recommended just using one of the fuel pumps, but then I said, well, why don't I just regulate the fuel pressure? So I bought this this Mr. Gasket, and you basically just click it into place from between 1 and 6 pounds of fuel pressure. So put that in line also. So I have it set at 5 pounds, which is between 4 and 6. Now I have to remove this part of the command center, replace it with the new one, and put it back together, and hopefully that solved the problem. Now the only other thing that I could think caused the problem is a loose wire, perhaps jiggling. You know, if you turn something on and off real fast a bunch of times, you could burn it out. So also, like, because I want to connect it directly to the battery, this also was having connection problems due to the rust down here in Florida. So there's a 25 amp fuse that was popping. So if you follow this orange wire to its fuse box, you'll see it's popping the fuse. One of these, wherever the orange one is. I don't know which one right now. It's 25 amp fuse. So I had went through 2 or 3 of those before I finally figured out what was wrong. So it's good to have some spare fuses around in your electrical toolbox. You start figuring out what's wrong. Then another problem I had was overheating. And I showed you the blue fan, but it's overheating at the idle, and then it's staying overheating when you start driving because the blades were too small. If you rewind, you can see the little flat blue blades are not sending enough air towards the engine. So I had to buy a new extension to get these bigger blades, and then also new bolts that were longer to make everything fit. And now it's not hitting the power steering pump on my serpentine system. And so that's all I can tell you for now about the fuel system, but it's kind of something you need to know so that you don't have catastrophic failure like I did. All right. Okay, just a couple more tips. This thing is supposedly for supercharger vacuum. So I put a rubber cap on it. But now I'm thinking that may have been a mistake, because this may need to be open to the atmosphere. Although I don't have any documentation going either way. From now on, I'm just going to leave it off, because I'm still not fully determined of what caused the internal meltdown of the pump. Another thing is, just to let you know, if you're the first time you're using an electric fuel pump, you have to have a fuse amp. I still have to hook this up, but if you read the directions, it needs to be like 5 amps. And reason being, if you just go straight to the battery, it'll work for about a couple of weeks, and then it'll shut down, burn out. But when you, I've done that 2 or 3 different times, but when you put the amp fuse in, I've never had them burn out after that. So it's just somehow it's an important component to have, and that's about it that I can think of. All right. Okay, so now we have another update to the fuel system, which is that the electric fuel pump was too noisy, and when I look into the glass filter, it's not keeping it full, which means it's just going to burn up because it's pumping, basically it's pumping air. So when you have a situation like, it's supposed to quiet down when the fuel is full, or at least this one was supposed to. So that tells me that it's not getting the fuel. And since I was running it through the mechanical fuel pump, the more I thought about it, the more I said, you know, if I'm stuck on the side of the road, I don't want to deal with a mechanical fuel pump. Even though technically it should be simpler, more dependable than an electric fuel pump, because electric fuel pumps burn out. But then I said, you know what, I'd rather just change the electric fuel pump underneath the car than the mechanical fuel pump with the sockets, because you got to jack up the car and get underneath it. So I put a plate in. I don't know if you can see that. Right there. There's a chrome plate to take the place of it. And then when I started to work with this end popped out, which is kind of like, it's kind of set in there just with pressure. So that kind of scared me. It's like pressed in there, so now it's basically stripped. I don't want to try like gasket sealer. I think I already put some gasket sealer in there, but gasket sealer and gasoline don't work well together. So I was kind of scared of that. So then I just went ahead and bit the bullet and said, you know what? I'm just going to have it gravity feed into a new fuel pump. So I had to spend the $50 for the new Edelbrock fuel pump, electric, gravity fed now from the fuel tank up. And so then, you know, you gotta, when you buy these, you have to read all the labels, because they have different sizes for different. So you see, you got a 38 gallons per hour, 4 to 7 psi. That's bigger than the one right next to it, which was a 17303, which was like a 30, 32, and a lot smaller psi. But see, remember, I'm dealing with the 4 to 6, and this goes 4 to 7. Okay. And it also, some of them say how many horsepower, and the other one was like 325, but I think I'm running about 400 horses. So you have to read the labels, make sure it's not a diesel, whatever. Make sure it pumps enough volume for your hot rod. So I went ahead, again, got this set at 5. Got my glass filter to see if it gets full, stays full. The only other thing I'm concerned about is the return line might be building up pressure if it's not free flowing. So I'm going to check that when I get it started. And this is coming from the electric fuel pump, pressure regulator, command center, over with the overflow line. This used to hook to the mechanical fuel pump. I got it teed off, and then this route line runs over supposedly to the gas tank. I just don't know if it's blocked. I think it has a little bit of room to breathe. So now I'm gonna start it up again and see what happens. Okay, so I noticed that this return line that used to go to the mechanical fuel pump is building up pressure when there should be no pressure. It's just returning a little bit of extra fuel to the tank. And I told you before, you can use your carbon canister line, which I used right here. Towards the bottom it had rust, then it started leaking gas, so I had to repair that. Under this wheel was a rubber connector without a clamp. It was leaking. And then I started tracing back to find out why it's building up pressure, and there's another rubber connection. Basically, the line goes around the back of the car underneath, connects to a rubber line, little rubber connection, then goes back across, then back across again, and then comes to the tank. So any of those curves can build up rust over time if they're not being used and things like that. So to figure all this out, I had to drop the tank. But even if you drop the tank with the jack holding it up, it's hard to get to. So I cut this out with the angle grinder, and then I can always access this whenever I need to without dropping the tank, and even access it now with, you know, you can't like see up in there while you're underneath the car. The only thing is, you know, when you're finished, you have to make sure that everything is sealed. You build a you could build a metal cap with screws. Maybe put some gasket sealer on there, some tar or something, I don't know, but hopefully not. Just making sure that there's no fumes coming into the car is the most important thing after that, after you make this cut. Which, you know, it's kind of like having a fuel cell, but dirtier parts, and you got to make sure it's sealed up. So, this line here is your fuel supply line. Then there's a smaller one, which looked like it was welded in there. That's your return line. So this one has the meter fuel gauge. So if you ever want to access that or put a new gauge in, it's just going to be easier if you have this cut out. Now, trying to find out where it's clogged, I was opening up different areas. Now the way that I cut these lines is with a, where is it? A plumber's pipe cutting tool. Because you don't want to use the angle grinder where there may even be a small possibility of gas fumes, because you're going to be creating sparks. So this is a little plumber's pipe cutter. You tighten it a little as you go around. Okay, that way you don't create any sparks and you make a nice clean cut. So when I was cutting this, I put some things around down in there so the spark wouldn't go down into that hole and light the tank on fire. Oh gosh, it's hot out here in Florida. Now, here's what I found out. On the part that they have, it's basically just gasket sealer into it went like this. But as soon as I started working with that line, it broke itself apart. I wasn't even trying, and then I just broke the rest of it apart. It's just some gasket sealer around this edge. But here's the trick. From the carbon canister, I don't know if you can see that, there's some kind of a metal restrictor right there on the end. I kept blowing through the end to see if it was clear, and it wasn't like full blast. So I'm like, there's something in there. I don't know if it's in the corner, rust. I was blowing air through there, carburetor cleaner, but then I looked down in there, and there is a restrictor piece of metal. I don't know if you can see that. But see if I shine the light on it. Guess you can't shine the light and take a picture. So I'm going to cut that out somehow, dig it out. And we should have, see what I think is happening is when it builds up pressure, it's causing command center to shut down and leave you stranded until you figure out what's wrong with it. Because what happened was I ran air through here with some tape, and I even taped the handle to keep the air going, and I could hear air coming through the gas cap take the gas cap off. But it's tricky because it's not enough. There's air. I even heard it dripping. But the problem is it's not enough because of this restrictor. So I'm going to take the restrictor out and just plumb a straight rubber line to the line that's coming here instead of all this back and forth jazz. And that'll be it for this section. So this is the little metal restrictor that's going to cause problems with your return because there's a lot of fuel in the return line. So that was in there like that. I took the drill bit that just fit in there. Sorry, that was in there like that. Took the drill bit, fit in there. It latched onto the drill bit and pulled out. But now it's clear. And then I'm going to clean this up, put some new gasket sealer, and reinstall. Okay, so I don't know if I mentioned before, but don't cut this out with the angle grinder with the gas tank in place. You need to drop it first so you sparks. You won't cut into the tank and blow yourself up. So I got this cleaned up best I could for the new gasket sealer. I like this copper stuff for some reason. And it turns out when you jack the tank back up, it holds this into place. Like it's going to go up a little bit higher and hold it into place. And then, I mean, I was going to have everything hooked up before I put the gasket on there to make sure you don't move it around once you got the gasket sealed. But since it's going to hold it in place before I put the straps back on, I might as well put the gasket sealer on now and then put everything else back together. So I added a new rubber line so it just goes straight over underneath the car instead of all this back and forth jazz. And that's it. Before you start working on the gas tank, make sure you have a fire extinguisher and the needle is on green. That means it hasn't been. Okay, so everything's back together. I was wrong about the weight, about the jack holding up the thing. So what I did was I put some extra gasket sealer on the top again, sealed it up. So there's gasket sealer inside and around. Then I put this weight on to hold it down while it dries. And then there's something, the fire extinguisher is jacking up the weight in order for it to be sitting on there. Make sure it's sitting, putting pressure on that spot right there till it dries. So I'm not going to drive the car for a couple days till that dries real good because that's the only thing holding it on there. But everything's back together so it shouldn't move around. I'll show you underneath what I did. Okay, so their line came up over here, around here, came around here, came. Oh, you can't see my hand. I'm gonna try it again. Okay, their line came around here, curved again, came back. Okay, but this line, I cut it. I cut the metal over here on the end. So all of this is original up to the spout. Then this is my rubber line that starts. It goes up above stuff so that it doesn't touch the exhaust. I mean, this part of the exhaust may not get that hot, but I just don't want to touch any exhaust because you're dealing with heat and then gas fumes. Return line. So then this is where it starts the metal line again and goes back to the front of the car. And that's it. That's your return line. Okay, so I'm going to show you what I had to work on. The mechanical fan doesn't keep the engine cool enough at idle. I'm assuming because of the bigger cam. And the new fuel injection system is running it leaner than the old Edelbrock gas guzzler. So it's overheating at idle. So after doing my internet research, I found out just need to eliminate this and install a new it's supposed to be, this is from Summit Racing. It's about $259. It's supposed to be about 3,000 CFI, which is like close to the highest they make. Dual fan system. And the car cools off when it's moving, so that means when there's air going through this way, it keeps it cool enough. But since this isn't turning fast enough, we have to have an electrical one, which I have to install. But then what I was working on inside was the wiring, because unless you're going to hook up a big like battery cutoff switch and turn it on and off yourself, that's really the bad idea. So this is a $50 relay, also from Summit, but it's a kit. So altogether it's about 300 bucks. And it's nice because each wire has a label on it, but once you know how it works. And that's why what happens is, instead of controlling the 30 amps, about 20 amps of power to the fan, the relay lowers it down to a manageable level. So what you wind up with is that these red ones go to the battery, the black ones coming out of the fan, as I showed you, it's going to the negative side of the battery, but it's still not being turned on and off. It's supposed to, you're supposed to run a ground to turn the fan on. And so the green one, it's ground, but you see how small it is compared to the power of the battery? That means it's just a switch. That's how the relay works. It's a smaller switch that controls a bigger switch. Okay, so you have an orange one that goes to the ignition. That turns it on in general, which anything that goes to an on-off ignition, I run into this set of wires to the distributor. So it's going to get hooked to this big twisty. Then you have the green ground for one of the fans and the little black ground for the other fan. So since this actually is what you want to turn on and off the fan, is the ground, because most fan systems are run by the ground, which some of them they'll put the thermostat here that's adjustable, and that grounds turns on and off the fan through the relay. So once it's hooked up right, then the Phytech has a fan ground, which I wasn't even going to use, but luckily I didn't cut the wires. So I need to find the fan ground. So the blue one's the tack, but it'll say fan on it. I don't know which one it is. Maybe this yellow one. I don't know. But one of them says fan, and that's the ground. So the computer, then, when your engine is running, the computer here, you can set the fan to come on and off at. Now your thermostats are usually set around 160 to 180. So you don't need the fan on if it's below your thermostat level. So you could set it at about around 160 on the low side. So it comes on at 160 and it'll stay on till it drops to whatever number, let's say 145. Okay, show you the products. It's the Summit G4 851 dual 12-inch 225 watt fan assembly. So that's the, and then the relay kit, also from Summit but a different company, is okay. So wanted to show you the fan is the Summit G4851 assembly instructions. This is if you need to turn the blades around, which they don't recommend. Comes with this mounting bracket, and then the relay is this Ron Francis AR79 dual cooling fan relay system, which gives you the instructions but no diagram. So what I did is I just sat down and built the diagram after instructions. So you can see here you got red going to positive side of the battery. You've got blue going to the two fans. Blue wires are also coming out of the fan. Black wires coming out of the fan, ground. Just go to the ground side of the battery. Those are the big, thick black ones I was using the blowtorch on. Ignition on, orange. It's going to be the distributor wire that I told you about. And then, so all of this is on until these ground. When this, or all of these are off. Its power is on, but it's off until these two little wires ground. So most systems are ground operated, green and black. That turns the fan on. So once you turn the key on, everything else is waiting for the ground. This is what you hook to the Phytech wire that says fan. Then you can control the temperature at which these fans come on and off. And that's the diagram. Okay, I wanted to show you my soldering techniques. because the ones that I saw on YouTube weren't working for me. So this one I just finished, has the solder on it. I'm still going to do the other one. When you're dealing with all of this stuff, it's best to solder it, because these things come loose and fall apart, and you're driving and the car breaks down. So I did learn off the YouTube to buy like the right kind of flux, water soluble paste flux. I had a different kind, but basically you need to have that in there. Okay. And then also he recommended, I don't need that, so that's okay, this kind of solder, which says electrical, so it's not plumbing, and it supposedly has, wait, where's the package? I just ripped it out of the package. So, find the package. Let me see if I can read this. Nope, I can't read it. Well, anyway, let's stop that one. I'm going to show you some of my soldering, because the ones that were on YouTube weren't working for me. So, but he did help me. Okay, so you want to make sure you have the right flux. So there's water soluble paste flux, and then 60-40 leaded wire solder. So these two things are important. It's electrical. So what wasn't working for me was that just doing this doesn't make it hot enough. So the best what's working for me is using two of them. So I'm holding it down with one, and then I'm heating it with the other. And this one's plugged in with a C-clamp holding it in place on the table. So you see it's getting hot enough to boil the paste. But it's not melting the solder, so you gotta wait till all the paste boils off. And then you still have to heat it up some more. So if you just heat it on here, that's called a cold. If you heat it on here and try to drip it down, that's a cold. It doesn't stick right. So you have to heat the metal up, the wire and the metal up first, and let it melt down onto it. So once this gets hot enough, even 2 soldering guns isn't really hot enough yet. There it comes. Getting enough heat now. I want it to melt down onto that copper all on its own. There it goes, melting into it. A whole bunch on there, and take it off. Burn my foot. Okay. And that's soldered connection. Which I wish it had more solder on the top. That. So that should be soldered together. When you put the wire through and you're clamping it down, you're supposed to be clamping on the rubber part of the wire. Like you don't have the wire going through this plastic. You just have the metal part of the wire only comes out here. Then this clamps to the rubber part, so it holds it in place better. And so that's what I did there. So the rubber casing of the wire goes all the way to the end, and then you just have this wire. So this is clamped onto the rubber wire. And that's how I did my solder. Now, I just did another one, which finished using, my chair keeps getting stuck on this, using the shrink casing, and so you cut off a piece of this, put it on there, cut off a piece like that, put it on there, use the heat gun, shrink it down to seal it up so moisture is not going to get in there and corrode your connection. But basically, like, I wanted to show you that because neither one of these guns will heat it up by itself. So this one stays plugged in. This one you got to hold the handle in, and it's kind of vibrating. That tells you it's on. If it's not vibrating, you could be holding the button, but it's not vibrating, it's not on. And so you want all your connections to be done right. This is for the fan, but it doesn't matter. So now, what I ran into was these really, really thick wires and two soldering guns wasn't enough. So what I want to do is put this pretty much on its lowest level, because it doesn't take much. I don't know. I got this old thick solder. Let's try that. Doesn't take much. That's kind of balling up. Go like that. So back to you can heat the bottom. The hottest point is the little blue point. You just touch that to that wire, and you see it's heating up the whole mass of copper. So I can just pump the solder in there. This is for the big ground wires. Instead of hooking two up for the fan. I'll talk about the fan a little later. See that? Just pump that solder in there. There we go. Now, should be a nice ball of solder holding all these wires together. Let that cool. Get it off the soldering gun. Solid. Let's take a look at the underside. The underside doesn't have much solder on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to flip it upside down. This is just kind of holding it at this point. I want to flip this wire upside down. Need something heavy. Hold it in place. I mean, I can see a little bit of solder eking through there, but it's not enough. So, solder. some more solder on there. So that looks like a big, strong ball. So this is the ground for the radiator fan. It's a big, powerful wires. They look like they're solid now. And I just wanted one big hookup instead of two. So I soldered it together, and now as time goes on, so this shrink wrap was actually going to be too small, and I kind of burnt it up anyway. So I'm just going to use black electrical tape. Now there's liquid electrical tape. If you want to spend the money, it's probably better to use the liquid electrical tape. But at this point, I don't want to spend too much time going to the store because I got to go back to work. So we can do that later if we so desire. Touch-up job. Take this tape off and put on liquid electrical black tape. So they got that pretty much sealed up real good. Another round. Keep the moisture out. Moisture causes corrosion. So there we have one big, thick one. All right, so no longer do we have a mechanical fan. We got electric fan, two of them wired up, and this wire goes to the ignition on. The yellow wire from Phytech goes to the two grounds. So what I did was, before I hooked this up, I touched the ground. I touched the two wires to hear the fans come on before I even started the engine. So I know, that's why I'm only going to put this on there, because if I ever, Phytech's computer won't turn the fan on, I could just ground these two wires to something and the fans will come on. So what Phytech does is ground these through the computer, the yellow wire. It says fan on the wire. And these two say ground on it from the relay switch. Here's the relay switches. Okay, so I gotta hide all that still again. And so for the test, we need to hear the fans come on when it reaches 160. That's where I got it set. And it's almost there, so I'm going to start it up again. And we're going to see if the fans come on at 160. So there's no fan. No fan on. I guess it's a bit like a piece of paper. 160. Fans come on. So let's get something that we know will blow the fan on, like this piece of paper. Well, there's no fan on it. That's it. We can turn the fan on for that. So it's cooling, the fans came on. And it's cooling it at idle. Slowly getting cooler from the fan. So the problem has been solved.